Hello and welcome to Talking Points. I'm Dave Kelly, Director of Advanced Media Production at Cal State Long Beach. Today we'll be talking about the American educational system and preparing students to compete in the global economy. My guest today is Dr. Marquita Grenot-Scheyer. Dr. Grenot-Scheyer is the Dean of the College of Education. Welcome, Marquita, and thank you for joining us on Talking Points.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, let's start the conversation by talking about the vastness of the American educational system. We're a very large country. We're very diverse, both geographically as well as demographically, and the patterns of economic development certainly vary from region to region, which affects the amount of resources that might be available in any given school district. And that being the case, no two school districts are the same, and in fact, no two classrooms are the same. And so how do we develop a national policy for educational standards that allows some flexibility for each classroom and yet maintains a level of standards that are more or less the same across the board?
So we both know that education is a state responsibility. However, we have federal policies and rules and programs and resources that enhance the education that states provide and that local school districts deliver. I would hope in our great country in 2015 that each and every child and young person has an equal educational opportunity, and many of the federal regulations are based upon those rights of individual students. So having said that, yes, there is tremendous variation across school districts. We have very affluent school districts and we have impoverished school districts, and we have a responsibility to prepare teachers and counselors and leaders so they can work in that range of school district situations, if you will. When I think about equal educational opportunity, I think about the kinds of curricula that is being presented to students. And so I know we're going to talk a little bit about the new national standards, so I'll just mention them here. The Common Core State Standards and the Next Generation of Science Standards are a rigorous, comprehensive, and cohesive set of national standards that I'm very optimistic that are going to help school districts level the playing field, if you will, for all of our students in our nation.
All right, and you mentioned Common Core standards. They've been adopted and discussed by the vast majority of states here in the U.S. There are some states that have raised some objections to the Common Core standards, but they are described as, quote, based on rigorous content and the application of knowledge through higher order thinking skills. And what does that mean exactly?
So these new standards are revolutionary. As you know, they were developed by a group of governors and the Chief State Council of Chief State Officers back in 2009. And these two groups came together and invited researchers and practitioners and parents and community members to look at existing national standards and to come up with those comprehensive best standards that they had thought for all of our children and youth in the United States. So they require critical thinking, creative problem solving, effective communication, and effective collaboration. So when you go online and you look at these standards, they really are quite complex and multi-layered, and it's not the fill in the bubble. It really is presenting a problem or a scenario or activity to a child and having them think through the solutions, and then of course demonstrating their thought processes. So these new standards really represent a whole different way of thinking about the curriculum, and so I think they're very, very promising.
Okay, and as you mentioned, you have the curriculum and you have the presentation, but you also have the thinking about what the students have learned, the reflection part of it. And we can go back 2,500 years to Confucius, because he had something to say about this in 500 BC or so, and Confucius said, "He who learns but does not think is lost. He who thinks but does not learn is in great danger. So a bit of a warning from, or a blast from the past, if you will.
Indeed.
So that seems to apply here.
It absolutely does. And when you think about, so these skills are called 21st century skills. When you think about what future employers want in their employees and what we want in future students here at the university, we want critical thinkers. We want individuals, because most people can memorize facts, but we don't want just that. We want people who can look at a situation, think about it in critical ways, and come up with some pretty creative solutions to the problems. We can't even imagine the problems that the next generation is going to face in terms of the environment, in terms of global economic circumstances. So we need to instill and have our students practice those kinds of creative problem solving, and most importantly, working together to solve those problems.
And before we had the Common Core standards, we were operating through another initiative known as No Child Left Behind. And I think that both No Child Left Behind and Common Core start from the same premise, the same basic premise, and that premise is that we need to raise up the educational standards. We need to have the rising tide lift all boats, if you will, and we need to prepare for the future and be competitive. I think there's a difference, though, in the philosophical approach and also the technical approach into how these standards are to be adopted. Could you explain the difference between No Child Left Behind and the Common Core standards?
So No Child Left Behind was a recent iteration of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So we still have that at the federal level. And the Elementary and Secondary Education Act is going through another reauthorization. Back in 2001 or 2002, it was labeled as No Child Left Behind. And the goal of No Child Left Behind really was very meritorious, and that was all boats rise, or all boats rise when the tide comes in. And the specific focus on students who are not achieving as well as some of their peers was really important and really helped to push teachers and principals and counselors to step back and look at the achievement gap that was present and continues to be present in schools. The flip side of that was the focus on the high stakes testing and the accountability that goes along with that. Having said that, there's nothing wrong with being accountable to ourselves and to our children and to the community members, but it's what are those accountability measures and what's at stake in these high stakes testing. So recently, there was a verdict that came down in Atlanta just a couple of weeks ago where 11 teachers were convicted of cheating and lying as it related to standardized test scores. Cheating and lying are never okay, but my concern is with the pressure that those teachers felt to make sure that their students' test scores were at a particular level. It's that kind of pressure that I worry about as Dean of the College of Education. Okay,
and as you said, cheating and lying are never acceptable,
right.
And the fact that people think that they have to go to this level to increase the scores is troubling. At the same time, as you mentioned a moment ago, we have some viewers in our audience that may be saying, well, what's wrong with testing students to find out if they have basic skills, if they can apply basic skills? Is it a good thing to test for basic skills?
Well, if by basic skills you mean reading, writing, and arithmetic, there's nothing wrong with that. And our current testing machine does that. We do need to understand what basic skills children and youth possess so that we can build upon those basic skills to allow for more creative thinking and problem solving. So no, there's nothing wrong with testing for basic skills.
Okay, well, since we're talking about testing and we're talking about competition and the global economy, which is fast moving, we should talk about testing and comparisons with other countries. Sure. That leads us to the PISA program, which is the Program for International Student Assessment. This is a series of tests that are offered to 15-year-old students in the countries of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. 28 countries are competitors in the global economy. And if we look at the results of the most recent round of testing, we find that there's some good news and maybe not so good news. We'll start with the good news. We finished about in the middle of the pack, and people may say, well, what's good about that? I say, well, it could be better, but if we look at Germany, one of our competitors in the world economy, certainly a very high-tech country, they finished 1 point above us. They finished at 509, we finished at 508 on the scale that was developed, essentially statistically the same. So are we okay if we're scoring at the same level as Germany, which is a very high-tech country, or is there always room for improvement?
Well, yes, there's always room for improvement. And these international rankings, I think, are important because of the lessons that we learn from other countries. So the status of the United States has not changed over the last decade or so. We tend to be right in the middle of the pack. And I think there's some reasons behind that I can certainly identify. Because we are in a global economy, it is important that we assess where we are in these rankings. But more importantly, we think about what we could be doing to improve our school system. So when you think about what Finland's doing, what Singapore's doing, what Canada is doing, they're investing in public education in ways that we're not still in the United States. They have a coherent and rigorous national curriculum, which we will be moving towards with Common Core and Next Generation Science Standards. They attract and retain the highest quality teachers. Teaching in some of these other countries is really, really viewed as a very high status, high level profession. Not so much in the United States, but we're building towards that. And then finally, I talked about the investment in public education. So we do have some lessons to learn from these other countries and some room to grow.
Right. The Asian countries of Singapore, Korea, and Japan finished at the top. That's not a big surprise. That seems to happen pretty regularly. They scored 562, 561, and 552 respectively. Why are those countries doing better than we are, and how can we catch up?
Well, as I mentioned, those areas in terms of kind of investment, the teacher, the status of the teaching profession, the collective commitment to education in those countries is very different than we see here. I was reading something about what's happening in Shanghai, and they've moved away, a bit away from an elitist kind of delivery of educational services to more of an egalitarian regional service delivery model, in the recognition that all children have to have this highly rigorous curriculum. And so I'll be really interested to see if those test scores change over time or if they continue to rise too, because they're capturing all of the children.
Okay, and on that note, we're going to have to go to the break.
Okay.
And when we come back from the break, we'll talk about specific issues that affect the classroom on a daily basis. Stay tuned.
Who designs things like needle-free diabetes care, robotic checkups, and electronic aspirin? The answer, biomedical engineers. It is one of the most rapidly growing career fields in the United States. These people analyze and design solutions to problems in medicine and biology, improving the quality of patient care. With a degree from Cal State Long Beach, you can become a part of this amazing career field.
Welcome back to Talking Points. I'm Dave Kelly, and my guest today is Dr. Marquita Grenot-Scheyer. Dr. Scheyer is the Dean of the College of Education. We're talking about international competitiveness and the American educational system. And Marquita, when we left, we were talking about the PISA program, the program for international testing and an assessment. We know that from these standards that we did well in some areas, but not so well in other areas. We seem to do particularly well in areas that involve interactive tasks, interactive problem solving. It means that students in America are willing to accept a certain amount of doubt and uncertainty. They're able to employ novelty, and they're able to use intuition when they initiate a problem solving task. So what does that say about us? That would seem to be some good news about applying skills in a fast-charging global economy.
I think it's very good news, and I think our future employers out there are very excited about those future employees. The engineering firms, certainly our political civic organizations, they want risk takers. They want individuals who can work together. They want individuals who can problem solve and to leave their comfort zones a little bit in exploring solutions to novel problems. So I think those results speak very highly of how we're preparing our next generation of individuals.
So that again goes to the good news part of
Yes,
the story.
yes.
Now on the not so good news part of the story, because we need to address this as well, we found that 18% of the students from the United States were not able to meet proficiency level in problem solving. So what does that say about where we are and what do we need to do to change that?
As we mentioned before, the new generation science standards, Common Core state standards, I think are going to really help us to close that gap of learning for all students and challenge our students in different kinds of ways. I think a criticism of former testing and curricula was that it was very rote and very mechanical, and students who did well in memorizing facts did well. So this new way of thinking and doing and learning is really going to, I think, challenge students in different ways. So I'm very optimistic about the potential of these new standards.
Okay, well let's talk about the specific issues in the classroom that I mentioned before we went into the break. Let's go through some of those. The first one that comes to mind is classroom size. When everyone refers to the size of the classroom, meaning the numbers of students that are in the classrooms themselves, are the classroom sizes still too large to affect maximum quality in our educational system?
So it depends on what school district you're in. There's not really clear research that would suggest that this is the optimum classroom size. But just practically, you can't probably fit more than 25 bodies into an elementary classroom. And so in the state of California, there's a new financing formula, the local control funding formula. It's about 2 years old now. And so school districts would be given flexibility to determine classroom size, to determine support services, to provide necessary resources and support for students who are at a disadvantage for learning. So classroom size is part of that mixture, but it's not the whole story.
Okay, and what about the issue of poverty in the public school classroom? We know across the country it's about 1 out of 5 or 22% of students come to the classroom from situations that are not ideal. In California, we know that the Census Bureau came up with the supplemental poverty measure of 2013, which indicated that California is at the high end of the chart in terms of poverty levels. In fact, we're the highest in the country, 23.4% across the board. Now that can vary from school district to school district. Some can be at 50% or even as high as 75%. So what does it do to a classroom environment when students come to school, they haven't had enough to eat, for example?
Well, it impacts learning, and the research is very clear in that area. And so we as individuals and we as community members have to take on this issue of poverty. I often think about how are we preparing our teachers and our counselors and our educational leaders to face this very dire and dismal fact that is a reality in California and the nation. And so what I tell my teachers is you make a difference or an impact one child at a time, and then you have to work systems wide, and you have to advocate for more wraparound services and nutritional services. I mean, we have free and reduced lunch programs in California and across the nation, but there's so much more that we could be doing to stem this tide of poverty. In our great nation, the fact that 1 in 5 children goes to bed hungry every night is absolutely unacceptable. And so as individual consumers, we have to take responsibility for that.
Okay, and another issue that's really important, and any teacher worth her salt or his salt will tell you that family involvement in children's education is absolutely critical. Some would say it's the most important element is the family involvement. That being the case, how do we get parents engaged, and in some cases it may be grandparents, engaged in the active participation of education with their children?
So you're absolutely right. Family involvement is critical to the success of students' academic and social achievement. And families want to be involved. what we have to remember, and what I would remind your audience, is that there's such a diverse range of families out there, but each and every one of them wants to be involved in some ways. And so the most creative teachers and counselors and leaders will figure out ways to involve families who may be working multiple jobs. We have families who are homeless and living in cars. We have families who have all sorts of complexities, but our responsibility is to figure out a way to bring their talents and their resources, be they limited or not, and their backgrounds and their culture into the classrooms, and that enhances learning. We know that from research.
Well, when we talk about success in the classroom, today we're talking many times about technology being introduced into the classroom as well. And technology can be very helpful. It can help stimulate learning. It can help engage the students, certainly in the classroom environment. But there's also a downside to technology, and that takes us into the area of cyberbullying and things of that nature. And just the general distraction of technology when everyone has a cell phone and everybody wants to get involved in social media and so on. So let's talk about the positive side of technology first. How is it helping to reshape the classroom?
So technology is a fantastic teaching and learning tool, and so there's nothing we do in our classrooms or in our daily lives that we're not using technology. I mean, you have paper and pencil there, but that's going to become an iPad one of these days where you're taking your notes. And so we have to use it and embrace it, and we teach our prospective candidates how to do that in real clinical kinds of settings. So that's all the good parts of it. So the other the other side of it is that it can be a distraction in the classroom, and so all schools and all classrooms will have rules and procedures for the use of technology in classrooms, and it's just like any other tool, it has to be managed.
Right, and we did a program with another member of the College of Education, Don Haviland, about flipped learning, which is the way technology is being implemented in a different and innovative new way. So I would urge our viewers to take a look at that if they're interested in pursuing that topic. As far as the negative side of the cyberbullying, and we know that bullying has been an issue across the country, the traditional form of bullying, which is physical intimidation and so on. But now there's this new kind, an insidious kind, which does involve the internet and social media and so forth. What about cyberbullying? I know it's very difficult for teachers and administrators in the school to police every kind of interaction that children have in the school system or high school kids. But what can be done to try to stem the tide of this cyberbullying that's going on?
Well, you're right. It is extremely dangerous and extremely insidious, and there's not a week that doesn't go by on the evening news that you don't hear something about that. So this is a place where we can involve families and community members, because we all have a stake in that young person's welfare. And so as a school community and as a community, we have to have certain standards that we agree to and we support and we enforce, and that there's consequences that are real and serious for young people who engage in this kind of behavior. And then there's the supports and resources for the victims of cyberbullying. And so that becomes part of a classroom teacher's responsibility as well as a parent's responsibility.
Okay, and as far as the classroom being very diverse, we talked a little bit about that earlier, but in terms of training teachers, and that's what we do here at the university, how do we prepare teachers for that diverse and very complicated and inclusive world that they're going to find in the classroom?
So we prepare the most number of elementary and secondary teachers in the whole CSU system here at Cal State Long Beach. And we ensure that they have formative clinical experiences from day one, so that by the time they get to their student teaching at the end of their period, they are well versed and experienced with the diverse richness in our contemporary urban classrooms. So nothing is going to surprise the candidates that graduate from our teacher preparation programs. And most recently, we have refocused our energy to develop inclusive teachers. That is, blending general education and special education content and skills and experiences, so that these future candidates are going to graduate with a deep understanding of the needs of all kinds of children.
And as far as teaching as a profession, What's it like entering the teaching field today? It must be pretty exciting and also challenging at the same time based on what we've been talking about. But when teachers come back after they've been in the field for 3 to 5 years, recent graduates, what are they telling you?
Well, they tell us they got the best preparation here at the beach, and our district partners tell us that as well. Dave, yes, these times are challenging. Are they more challenging than they were 20 and 30 and 40 years ago? I don't know. I think the challenges have changed over times in terms of the complexity, but what hasn't changed, children and youth and their families are the same. And we have a responsibility to educate them and prepare them to be that next generation of citizens that we need for the state of California and for the world. And so they come back and they tell us how great they did, and then they come back and they want to come into our graduate programs because they want to deepen their knowledge and understanding of what it means to be the most effective teacher, counselor, or leader that they can be.
As far as individuals that are trying to decide whether they want to become a teacher or they want to get into some other field in the STEM sciences, science, technology, engineering, and math, they know they can go to Silicon Valley and perhaps make a lot of money. How do we retain them, or how do we keep a connection to those folks? And we just have about a minute left.
So not everybody gets to go to Silicon Valley, but if you have a deep passion in one of those STEM areas, come share it with the future children and youth, so that what is so exciting about being a teacher is you get to share your passion for your content for that next engineer or that next mathematician or that next principal or that next scientist. So I say come try us first, go to Silicon Valley, and then come back. We have a lot of career changers who enter the teaching field.
So just because you go to Silicon Valley doesn't mean you're done.
That's right, that's right, that's right.
Very good. Well, we've run out of time, unfortunately.
Thank you.
There's much more to talk about, but I want to thank you for being with us here today.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us today on Talking Points. Join us again soon for the next episode. Until then, I'm Dave Kelly. Have a nice day.